come and talk about the tannery. Well, I don't really know a terrible lot about the tannery because although my father worked for the tannery, we were not allowed to go into it only under very, very strict supervision. Because, of course, I don't know whether most of you, or well, you probably will know, that in the early days of tanning leather, the hides were hung up in kits. What I can tell you a little bit about is Field Lane. Field Lane itself, which you probably have all heard before, was almost like a hamlet. It came down from where Litherland Town Hall is now. There were council offices, and then there was the Field Lane, which was just a country lane with farmhouses on one side of the road and very big houses on the other side of the road with large gardens and no street lights, a lot of cobblestones. And we lived at the top end, at the end of Field Lane, which finished with the Liverpool Tannery. As probably most of you have heard in the studying the history of Litherland, will have known that there were two tanneries at the end of Field Lane, at the far end of Field Lane, and the Liverpool Tannery was at the very far end, right at the very end of Field Lane. Beyond that was only the canal bank. It finished at the what was when I was a child, the skin yard, and the skin yard was on the banks of the canal, and that was almost an unknown place for us to go to. We used to hurry past the skin yard because, of course, you can imagine the skins had been brought up from the docks and they were exposed to the air, and the smell was absolutely appalling. So we used to hurry past the skin yard to get on to the theme. But I did say I thought a little bit about Field Lane, that there was the first, as we passed the large houses, the big houses in Field Lane, and the fields, the farmer's field, there was Whaley's farm on one side of the road, and they had all their shippons and sheds for the cows on the opposite side of the road, and they had those very old brick walls. To remember the panels of brick that were locked together with things, and they were slabs of it, and the overside of the slab on the upside of the slab was where all the sludge from the cows and everything went. And one of the things that my brother used to do when we were going to school was climb on this wall and run along this wall. It has been known that he has fallen into it, and of course that meant that he was a whole day off school, and a very good walloping from my father for being foolish. But we did that. That was how we went to school. And when I started school, it was during the First World War. Well, Beach Road School had been taken over for a hospital, and I first went to a Litherland, a mission, which probably, seeing you, I don't think any of you will remember, but where Sefton Avenue is, there used to be, where the library is now, there used to be a mission there, and that was where I had my first class. And when I hear now about the mothers taking the children to school and having to take them to school, I walked from the top of Field Lane to the end of Field Lane to over the canal bridge and onto Linacre Road and into this mission church. And that was where I first went to school. And then when I finished there after my second year in school, we went to Linacre Mission. So I had to walk from Field Lane to Linacre Mission every morning, and if we were late, we were in trouble. But what I would like to tell you a little bit about Field Lane, there were the two tanneries, the Sefton Tannery and Liverpool Tannery, and the Liverpool Tannery was at the far end. The Sefton Tannery was the first tannery. And then most of the people who lived and who worked in the Sefton Tannery lived in a block of houses on the left-hand side of the road, which were called the Sefton Tannery houses. And most of the people in those houses all worked in the tannery. Then beyond them was another block of cottages, and they were real cottages, and they faced onto the canal bank. And they were called, in my day, they were called the pigsty cottages. Yeah. They were always called the pigsty cottages, and the reason was that at one time, the people used to the gardens were sloping down towards the canal. The front of the houses fronted onto the canal bank, on the backs of the houses faced onto Field Lane, and they had long gardens and went down the gardens, and people used to keep one pig. There was a little sty, and they would keep one pig. When I was a child, there was only one lady had a pig, and her name was Mrs. Jones, and she kept this pig in the pigsty. Well, of course, to us, he was a pet, and we always used to love and go and taking bits to this pig, and we would feed the pig. And then when the pig had matured and got fat enough and big enough to be useful, Matt Stubbs, who perhaps some of you will remember, was the butcher in the corner of Sefton Street. He had a butcher's shop there, and he used to come and kill this Mrs. Jones's pig. And put written down here, I was to always run upstairs and put my head under the pillows so that I couldn't hear the pig squealing. And then we were always given a piece of the pig. My mother was friendly and Mrs. Jones, and we given a piece of the pig, and I just wouldn't eat it. I said, no way was I going to have it. It was eating my pet. So that was then, but on the end of that group of houses, there was one cottage which a family lived just I don't ever remember there being any children. Well, they were much older than children probably being left. But they were a Mr. and Mrs. Markland. And Mr. Markland was the man who was in charge of what we called, Albert called it a turn-round place for the barges, but we used to call it a wanning pit. And it was an enlarged half circle on the canal banks that was hollowed out, so that when the barges had come from the Yorkshire down the canal with the coal for the tannery, and they used to unload the coal onto the tannery back and then go into the wanning pit to turn round. And that was when they were going towards the wanning pit. That was the time when if we were playing on the canal bank, the flat barge people would let us go on the barges and have a look at what they were doing and how they lived. And it was a wonderful experience going. Sometimes, as a very, very special treat, they would let us stay on the barge from our garden, where we lived, to the wanning pit and turn round. And then they would have to come into the side, and we would have to leap off the barge and onto the bank. But the horses didn't like that, because, of course, it meant that the barge was on the wrong side of the canal for them, and they were pulling hard on the ropes. So those were the kind of things that I remember as a child. We lived in this house. I don't remember when the Appletons took over the tannery, but the original people that I can vaguely remember were called the Beakbanes, and they were the original owners of the tannery when my father was working for them. My father had obviously lived in Field Lane, because he had gone to St. Philip's School, because I remember him talking about the headmaster as we got older, about the headmaster of St. Philip's School, whose name was Mr. Jones, and they used to call him Cocky Jones, because he was a very cocky man, and he was always wielding the cane. And when I went to school, I went to senior school, Beach Road School. The headmistress of the Beach Road School was Cocky Jones's daughter. My father had been quite a character, I imagine, at school, and I don't think they had let the headmistress's daughter, the headmaster's daughter, get away with very much. I think they had teased her and done an awful lot, because when I went to school, she said, I believe I have got an Eton, a Dorothy Eton. And I said, yes. And feeling very proud, I stood up and said, yes, I'm Dorothy Eton. It was the worst thing I could have done, because the rest of my life at Beach Road School was murder. I could never do anything right. But anyway, I managed to Beach Road School, and then eventually went to school in the Waterloo. But we lived in this cottage, and it was a cottage type of house, and my father had a certain responsibility to look after the temperatures in what were called the drying sheds for the leather and for the hides. When the hides were taken from the pits, can you imagine how the pits were huge, almost hollowed out tanks full of tanning acid, and the hides were tied on long poles and put down in the pits. And it took two men, one on each side of the pit, to lift these hides out of the pits and along, and they went into various stages through the tanning. Then they were taken out and put into what was called a drying shed, and the hairs were scraped off there. A horrible job it must have been for somebody to be doing that, pansy. Well, then they were taken into what was called this drying shed, and occasionally my father would take us on the weekend when there were no workmen. My father would take us, and we would have to walk very, very carefully between the pits, because there was just a narrow path between the pits, and you had to walk very, very carefully. So we would walk very carefully through this, holding our noses because of the smell, because of the tannic acid. But it was fascinating to see the various stages of the leather. And then when it was taken into the drying sheds, they were put hung up again on the drying shed. And this, to me, as a child, was quite a frightening experience, because the leather cracked. And as it was drying, it cracked. And it sounded almost like a gun going off. And the first time, I was probably about 5 or 6 when I first went. And I thought this was awful. I thought somebody was there with a gun and was going to shoot us, because we shouldn't have been there. But anyway, the leather cracked. And then eventually it was taken into the warehouse. And that was where my father worked, in the warehouse, where they sold the leather. And that was when he dealt with the buyers who used to come from all over, particularly from the Midland. And probably you will remember, but there used to be a train that came on Seaforth Railway Station, used to come to Seaforth Railway Station, and the buyers would have be collected at Seaforth Railway Station by a horse-drawn cab and brought to the top of Field Lane. And they would buy their leather, and then the cab would wait for them and take them back to the station. Because there was a train in those days that used to run from Southport to Euston Station in London. And it was a steam train, and you could get off at any of the stations between Southport and Edge Hill. It didn't go into Line Street, but it branched off and went to Edge Hill, joined up with a train from Lime Street, and then went on to London Euston. And when I was a child, and when I eventually went to Waterloo to school, it used to be a great thrill to wait for the train which came through Waterloo Station at 4:30, and we would stop, get off on the steam train, and it would go from Waterloo Station to Seaforth Station, and we would ride on steam train and imagine we were going to go to London. But we could guess, we only got that far. So that was, I really feel it was as much as I can tell you about the tannery. If there are any asked, is it right to stop the questions? Is there anybody would like to ask me any questions about Yeah, well,
there's two sorts of that.
yes, well, those semi-detached houses were specially built for my father and the engineer, the man who was the engineer, to go back to Field Lane. We lived, our houses were, before those houses were built, that used to be called the croft. And in that croft, that was where all the barrels of tannic acid used to be stored. And they were stored, piled up one on top of the other. And again, it used to be great fun to be going and running over the tops of these barrels. When it was very hot weather, it used to be very exciting because the barrel had to be kept cool, and there would be 3 men who would come with hose pipes, and very, very occasionally, if the weather was very, very hot, the fire engine would come with hoses, and they would spray all these barrels, because if the heat got to them and the temperature got very, very high, they just exploded. And of course, they exploded. That meant that that whole pile of barrels had to be washed, and it was something quite dangerous, because of course it was dangerous for us to get the fumes, because our houses were, how can I describe? You go up Field Lane, and before you got to the tannery, there was the croft, the pigsty cottages, then the croft, and then an opening, and down that opening, that was where the 3 houses were that we lived in, and ours was right onto the canal back. Well, when we left there and went to Nim, we were there, lived over Lee's the chemist. Mr. Lee had left the house behind the shop and went to live in Litherland Park. And he knew my father very well and said he had this house to let. Another wanted to move away from Field Lane. And my grandfather had come to live with us. And we went and lived over the chemist's shop. So we lived over Mr. Lee's chemist shop, up behind it and on top of it, for about 2.5 years. And the tannery decided that it wasn't very practical for my father to be so far away from work when he was dealing with the buyers, because the buyers came by train, and it didn't matter. In those days, of course, there were no facilities for you having food in your work. You had to supply your own. And it was all right while our house was on the premises, because my dad could come in, and if he wasn't in for dinner, well, it didn't matter. He'd come, but he had to deal with the buyers, because they were the important people who were keeping the tannery going. So they did away. I don't know quite what happened about this tanning of leather, but all the barrels just disappeared, and they cleared the croft and did something with the land and decided that they would build these 2 houses, one for the engineer and one for my father, who was the warehouse foreman, so that he would be near when the buyers were there and wouldn't have to think about walking the rest that Field Lane back again for his meal, because we never knew when Dad was going to be coming home for his meal. Because if the buyers had come on one tray and they'd gone to the Hawthorne tannery and the Maflecton tannery and then to the Liverpool tannery, they could come at any time, but they had to be finished so that they could go back to Seaforth Station to get that train which was going back, which went somewhere through the Midlands and used to go through Northampton, where all the shoemaking factories were. So that was part of the way that we lived, kind of thing. So then they built those two houses, and those are the two houses which we lived in the first one nearest Chamerley. But most of my recollection of being at Field Lane, living at Field Lane near the tannery, was that we used to have, there was what was called the Tannery Mission, and it was always known as the Tannery Mission, and it was run by Mr. Thomas Moss. He was a script reader, and the Miss Hardins had a lot to do with it, but my very, very first recollection of the Tannery Mission was climbing the stone stairs, because the mission itself was built over the stables. You see, with having horse-drawn things to bring the hides up from the docks, we have, the tannery have its own horses. So the horses had to be housed in this stable, and the mission church was built on the top of the stables. So you always had to go upstairs to get to the mission, and my first recollection is of climbing these stone stairs and catching the back of their legs on them when I was coming down them. And the Big Bains I must have been only possibly 4 or 5 when I can remember the Miss Beakbanes coming. They were the 2 daughters of the Beakbane family, and they were very, very sedate ladies. To me, I suppose, they looked like old ladies, but they probably were quite young. But they always wore these very, very high-necked things, and I used to see them thinking. And when I was little, I used to think, how awful it would be when I grew up, will I have to wear those? However, fortunately, the fashions had changed. But I can remember them being very, very sedate, walking, climbing up these stairs, and having to stand on one side while they went up the stairs into the Sunday school. Well, then the Appletons took over the tannery from the Beakbanes, and that is the family that I remember particularly, the Appletons being proprietors on the Liverpool Tanning Company. And they were there until after their son was there till after my father retired. So that is part of what I'd see. I can't tell you very much more about the tannery, but the mission church took a great deal of our time up. Sunday we had Sunday morning service, we had Sunday school on Sunday afternoon, and we had a Sunday evening service at 6:30 at night. And the mission had a Bible, a men's Bible study group. And if you were employed at the tannery, you were expected to go to the men's Bible study group. And my father went quite regularly, and I remember he very often got prizes for attendance. And one of them was a wonderful cookery book. And I still got the cookery book that my father won for attending the Bible study class. So then what we did when I was a child, part of our excitement, I think, or thing that we used to look forward to every year, was the Bootle May Day. And why you looked forward to the Bootle May Day was because we had to get the horses ready to go into the May Day procession. And I can remember of being quite a small child and holding a horse's hoof on my knee to wash the fetlocks. And we used to have to use a special shampoo, and they used to wash the horse's fetlocks so that they would be all nice and clean. And I remember Bootle May Day getting up very early in the morning because, of course, the horses were being used on a Friday and May Day was on a Saturday. And the horses had had to go down to the docks and bringing the hides back. And then, of course, they all had to be groomed and got ready to go to the Bootle May Day. And we would have a great excitement getting up very early in the morning because, and I can remember my mother saying to me, I don't know what on earth you want to be bothered going for. I say, well, Blossom's got to look sposh. Ollie, you know, she's got to be beautiful, Mum. She's got to be nice, and I'm washing her feet. And Mother said, I can remember Mother saying to me, "You can't wash horses' feet." And I said, "Yes, I hold it up and she's good. She never kicks me. She just lets me go and I rub all the things." And I can remember, sort of rubbing this horse's fetlocks on Blossom and saying, "Blossom, be good. Blossom, be quiet. Don't move." And I can remember doing that quite well. I mean, this is part of going over, isn't it? You're living in the past when you're sitting. Golly. It is part. It's great fun. It's great fun looking back. And so those were the kind of things. Well, as I say, we had this tannery mission and the mission church. And that was a great part of our lives, being at Field Lane, because most of the people who lived in Field Lane and Greenfield Lane worked in the tannery, and so because of having that opportunity for employment. People say that, that bosses or owners of places were, sort of fairly demanding. Well, I don't think there was any coercion put on people, but I do feel that people had to recognize that the tannery mission was giving them their living, or the tannery was giving them their living, and the mission was there for their benefit spiritually, and that they should accept it as a spiritual thing. And all the families did go, and I know there were 2 or 3 Catholic families, and the children came to the Sunday school, which was an almost unheard of thing in those days. I mean, after all, if you went into an Anglican church and you were a very, very devout Catholic, it was a very good thing. However, one of my friends did. She came regularly to Sunday school, and she used to say, "I enjoyed Sunday school. It's great. We don't have anything like that in our church, but so we come to the Sunday school." And she always sort of said, "Well, I can come to the parties if I come to Sunday school." Which did parties. No, it was all part of the excitement for her. Well, the Appletons took over the tannery, and it sort of changed. It became very, very much more friendly. There wasn't the same amount of dignity. The Appletons didn't have any daughters. They only had sons. They had 2 sons, and their eldest son was killed in the First World War. But then the youngest son came over, and he took over the tannery and as management at the tannery when his father fled to retirement. And there's great excitement because Mr. Appleton Sr. was going to go over into Wales and be a gentleman farmer. Now, I don't know what the difference is between an ordinary farmer and a gentleman farmer, but that was it. Mr. Appleton was going to be a gentleman farmer. And he went over and was full of enthusiasm for farming and bred prize cattle. And one of the things that we were always terribly excited about was if Mr. Appleton had won a prize at an agricultural show with his special cattle. And one of the beasts that he used to breed, always, every year, over the time, he would breed this one special animal, and that was to be cut up. And eventually, when it was killed, it was to be cut up, and it was all to be divided between the workforce in the tannery. And at Christmas time, everybody who worked in the tannery got some part of beef so that they could have a Christmas meal. And he divided the beef up. And if you'd had an extra baby during the year, I mean, how they decided that the new baby should have some beef, but you got a bigger piece of beef if you'd had an increase in the family. So they always had this to look forward to at Christmas time, was that they should have a meal, a Christmas meal from them, as well as the other things that they bought. So one of the things that you probably will find very amusing, but Mr. Eric Appleton the son, was the first man that I ever knew who had a motor car. And he had a sports Bugatti motor car. And he used to bring it up on a Saturday morning. And that again was a job. As well as having washed the horse's feet to go to the May Day, we had to wash the Bugatti. And we used to clean it up and polish it. And I can remember polishing the headlamps in this Bugatti car, thinking, how wonderful. Wouldn't it be wonderful to have a ride in it? I never ever got a ride in it. We used to have. But that was one of the things. So those are the kind of things I remember about the tannery. I hope, how long shall I talk? Shall I have a break?
You can stop when you want. You can start again when you want.
Well,
Carry on all day if you want.
So I'm going to take for all day.
I think I'll have a little rest now, and then I'll tell you more about the tannery mission and the mission things that we used to do at the mission church, and how that took a great part of my life. Will that do for?
What?
I could possibly tell you about the things that we used to have at the mission church, and that was, as I say, very, very much part of the life at the top of Field Lane, where everybody was involved in the tannery mission. We were attached to St Philip's Church, and were part of the parish of St Philip's until the new church was built at the top of Patton Hill, St Paul's Church. I can remember there being a lot of talk about whether they should build another church, whether it would be sensible. But of course, by then, all that new property was being built. There had been all the property built on Field Lane when Burroughs built the houses. Incidentally, Jim Burroughs built the two houses that we eventually moved back into Field Lane. It was Jim Burroughs who had built those two houses when he had been building Oxford Avenue and Cambridge Avenue, and you remember.
The style is the same, I reckon.
Yeah, exactly the same styles. He built all the houses in the same way, and then they started building Hatton Hill. To me, I at the beginning, I found it very difficult to accept such Hatton Hill Road. To me, it was always Victoria Road, where there were just about half a dozen big houses, and then on the other side of the road, before the town hall was built, there was the council offices, the big house, which had the council offices in before the Litherland town hall was built. And they had the council offices, and then almost beyond the council offices in Hatton Hill Road, or was Victoria Road, was Pippering's Farm. And I can remember one of the Miss Pickerings used to come to the tannery mission as a Sunday school teacher, as one of the Sunday school teachers, because we had very, very... One of the teachers at school, yes. Yes, one of the teachers did become... The same one who was the Sunday school teacher was the day school teacher as well, yeah. So we had quite close relationships with all those people. The farmhouses and the Stubbs's farm as well. And I can always remember being very, very excited in the spring when the Stubbses... It always felt to me as if the spring had come when the Stubbses, where they had their house in Sefton Road, which is where all the shopping area is now, where the shops are now. There used to be this pink building, and Stubbses always repainted their house about the first week in April. The whole of the house was washed over again with pink wash. And I can always remember, as a little girl, being talking to Mother and saying, the Stubbses have painted their house and it's spring. And she used to say, well, yes, but we have some more cold wind and some more cold rain as well. But it is the sign of spring when the Stubbses paint their house. And I can remember at the Stubbses' house jutted out, and there was a little heart on the little area. And in that area, there was a sweet shop and it used to be a Mrs. Cooper who kept this sweet shop. And it was just a tiny little shop, and it had little diamond pane windows, and it used to be great excitement to peer through these windows to see the kind of sweets that Mrs. Cooper had. And she used to have special kind of homemade sweets that we could always go and buy, and she would deal them out so many, you would get about 5 for a penny, or if you had 2 pennies, you got 10 sweets, and they would last you for ages. Those were sort of kind of things that I can remember about Litherland. And before so much of it was developed, I felt at one time when I was growing up that it was sad to see Litherland changing so much. But then I was very, very proud when they decided to build Townbourne in Litherland. By then, of course, I was married. My father was a member of the local council, and I can remember, I shouldn't be political, but I can remember going out and canvassing for the Conservative amendment and being a member of the young, what we call the Imperial League then, and the Young Conservatives. And we always had these kind of things. And we had this sort of, I can only think about it as being a loyalty to our locality. Does that sound rubbish?
No.
But we had a certain loyalty to our locality that we felt that we must support everything. I feel it's so sad that all that loyalty to our forebears, I suppose, has gone. And no, when you're talking to young people now, they don't seem to have that feeling of loyalty to their environments, and they're not interested in it. But it doesn't seem to be the same. I feel that we lost an awful lot, and I'm sad for the young people growing up today. But I do feel that possibly we people of our age group, I mean, I'm probably years older than a lot of you. Well, I must be years older than a lot of you, because I am an old lady.
I could look it up now, like.
And it's 2 years older than Albert. I remember Albert when Albert was a little boy. So that's first still is here.
Yeah, it's doing bad stitches. I remember Albert being a little boy, yeah. And I can remember it at Sunday school. Yeah. I can remember, as I was telling you about the Tannery Mission, we used to have our services there, and we were completely independent, more or less, from the church. Once a month, we used to come, the Sunday school from the Tannery Mission used to come to church, just Philip's Church. And we used to go into St. Philip's Church, and we, as Tannery Mission children, and we were always Tannery Mission children, were always put on the transept, which is where this is. Yeah. Where this is now.
Yeah.
We used to always have to sit in the left transept on the right-hand side of the church, and we would all be sitting in these pews, and if we did behave ourselves, one of the Sunday school teachers which has St. Mark's Mission, which was over the canal bridge where St. Mark's Mission, where the mission church used to be, she would come and tell us to behave ourselves. Tannery Mission children didn't know how to behave themselves. We had a certain amount of freedom at the mission, Tannery Mission, because we were all little scared. We all had great fun, and I'm afraid we giggled an awful lot. We had a lot of that. We had a great grounding in a way of life, which I think was a very good thing for us. But we did all sorts of lovely things. We had a thing, but one never hears about it now. But we had a fellowship called the White Ribbon Fellowship. And we had to join this White Ribbon Fellowship, and we had to swear that we would never take alcohol. Oh, we had a little white ribbon bow, of white ribbon, and we used to wear the berry cap. I mean, how they thought we of 9 and 8 and 9, 10 would be thinking of taking alcohol, I've no idea.
Like the Band of Hope?
Yes, it was like the Band of Hope, yeah. And we used to have it at the Pope at the top of the ministry.
Linacre Society.
We had something almost every evening that is almost something on us, so that we would sort of never felt that because we lived at the top of Fields Lane that we were missing out on anything, because there was always something going on. And one of my remembrances was of the Miss Hardings. I don't know, but do you remember any of them, the Hardings? Do you remember Eric Armstrong? Oh, yeah. Well, Eric Armstrong was the son. He was the son of the only Miss Hardings that got married. There were three sisters, Annie, Sissy, and Peggy, Margaret. Some people called her Maggie, but to me she was all Miss Peggy Harding. And she ran the Sunday morning service at the Tannery Mission. And when I was probably about 9, we acquired a piano. We got a piano, and it came to Field Lane, and we bought it from what was in Bridge Road, when Bridge Road was Bridge Road. We bought it from a music shop on the corner of Croxteth Avenue, and it was called Boggs, the music shop. And we bought our piano from there. And Miss Harding said she would teach me how to play the piano. And she taught me how to play, she taught me music. She was a very, very clever musician, but had never had the opportunity to use it to the fullest extent. But she was a wonderful teacher, and she taught me how to play the piano. And as soon as I could play, I go and play the piano for the morning services, the Sunday morning services, so that she didn't have to play the piano. She could take over the Sunday morning serving. We always had very exciting Christmas parties. We had Father Christmas, and we had lots of fun and games. I can remember we used to play blind man's buck, and we used to push one another around and have great fun. And if you had a boy and a girls who were getting pally, probably they're getting in, it'd be so wishing they were getting pally. You could imagine they would always, sort of be rushing to one another to find whether they dropped the right girl or the one, and there wasn't, but nobody was very, very interested. So it was all sort of very much family life and village life, really, because everybody knew everybody else and everybody was interested. I mean, it was terribly exciting when anybody had a new baby, because we all had to go and see this new baby. I mean, I can remember in Greenfield Lane, there was one family, and that lady, I should think she had a baby every 18 months. There was a new baby came. And I can remember us, perhaps 4 or 5 of us, standing in the garden path, because everyone had gardens in those days, and they're standing in the garden path all waiting to go and see this new baby, being very excited. And I can remember thinking, oh, wouldn't it be lovely to have a new baby? But we never had a bad baby. Well, we had the Christmas parties, and they were all very exciting. We had our own bazaar. They were never ever called Christmas fairs. It was always a Christmas bazaar. I don't know, you never hear of bazaars now, do you? Nobody ever talks about having a bazaar. Anyway, we used to have this Christmas bazaar, and my mum always baked cakes. And I was making a Christmas cake at home the other day, and I was thinking to myself, I can remember when we were little, we always scraped the bowl. Does anybody remember scraping the bowl when your mum had made a cake? And I thought, well, I never have any scrapings in the bottom of my bowls now. And I thought, well, here, this is modern life. We have plastic sprinting, so we never have anything left in the bottom of the bowl. So what's it been? These children always our young children miss scraping the bowl out after mum has made a cake. But those are the kind of things that I think we're missing, or our children are missing, our grandchildren, great-grandchildren. Not that I've got any great ones, good or bad. But those are the kind of things that they're missing. But I do feel that I had a wonderful life living up Field Lane, because it was like a village life rather than living in sort of, I can't think of the name, only calling it sort of semi-detached area where people keep themselves to themselves. We were all a family and everybody was interested in everybody else's life. And we were all very interested. I don't know whether any of you, I don't think all of you now, everybody talks about the Jubilee Inn. But I can remember that the top of Fields Lane, there used to be a pub called the Hen and Chickens. And when the Jubilee Inn was built, when they decided they must have a new pub because of all the development on Hatton Hill, all those new houses, and were decided that they would have the new hotel would be built. And for some reason, I've never ever been able to find out, not that I was very interested, I just sort of thought how awful it was that the Hen and Chickens was going to close. To me, the Hen and Chickens was great fun because I was very friendly. There was an elderly couple. Yes, they were an elderly couple who had, I think Mr. Jones had the license for the pub. And they had a granddaughter living with them, and I was very friendly with her. And I can remember going over to the Hen and Chicken, stay with the LT, and we used to have great fun. And one of the things that we used to do, we used to get behind, looking at the bar opened into the little kitchen. Back of the bar, the bar from the house, the door from the house came straight into the bar. And then we used to stand in the bar, and there used to be a man who sat in the corner over there. And they had sawdust floors. It was stone floors, and they had sawdust floors. And this man used to sit there, and he would be smoking his pipe, and there would be a spittoon over there. And he used to take bets into everything. He never missed. We used to sit there, and Elsie would say to me, watching, let's get it ready. Get it ready.
You reminded of being called the Copcast, that book?
Yes, it was. It was called the Cop. I don't know why they called it the Cop Tap, because it had always been a Hen and Chicken.
The hen wore the Cop hat.
Yeah, and that was on its side, yeah.
And so.
But it was always built, and then, so I sort of had very, very happy memories of Field Lane and the Tannery Mission, because the excitement of having these Christmas parties and the Dars, which was very exciting. And we always used to try, because they used to have then St. Philip's Church had the mission church on the top of Bridge Road. Before Church Hall was built, of course, they had the mission hall on the top of Bridge Road. And we had the Tannery Mission, and they were both attached to the church. And there used to be great competition between the Tannery Mission Christmas the Tsar and the Mission Church Christmas the Tsar, as to whether we would make more money than they would make more money. And this was all given to the church. And we had never felt that we were sort of being coerced into going to church, because although we had morning service at 11 o'clock, and then we had Sunday school at 3 o'clock, and then we had an evening service at 6:30 at night. And Mr. Moss always took the evening service at night, but Miss Harding took the Sunday morning service. Eventually, one of the Miss Hardings married, and she had a son, and some of you will remember, anybody who was getting connected to the Philip's Church, that Eric Armstrong was very, very active in St. Philip's Church, and there's a memorial to him in the church.
Few end.
Few end, yes, and then one of the ends of Q. That was, the Hardings were very, very busy with the mission and helped Mr. Moss a great deal. Has anybody got any questions they'd like to ask?
Can I just comment about Mr. Moss?
Yes.
When I was in the choir, he came to tape one of our services, and he's a very thin face with a little moustache. He didn't know when he was being humorous.
Oh, he had no sense of humour.
No.
Oh, no.
One of the sermons at the everybody in the church laughing, and the choir boy, chuckling. He was scandalised.
Oh, he would be absolutely horrified. One didn't laugh in church. Oh, no. No. I never laughed in church. I can remember one Sunday afternoon when we were in church, and it was very, very hot. And I had a hat on. And, of course, in those days, everybody went to church who always wore a hat. Never went to church without a hat. And I had this silk hat on, had elastic. Maybe when we used to have handy elastic that they watching. And I had this hat on with this elastic under the chin. I pushed the hat up and, had on the back of the head. And one of the teachers, not one of our Tamarish teachers, one of the teachers from the other church, this Hayne, and she pulled my hat, and she nearly choked. And she said, "You always wear a hat on church, and I can feel her still pushing this hat down on the top of my head." And you always wear a hat at church. And I think now when I go into church, and I go space chairs now before I'm living in Crosby, and we have two people who wear hats in church. Sometimes I'm one of them. But I think how life has changed over my lifetime. Sometimes I think not always for the better. I think the young people nowadays are missing a tremendous amount of simple joy, simple enjoyment. Everything has got to become so sophisticated and everything has become so competitive that we don't sort of think in terms of loyalty to each other. And so many people are feeling, I've got so demanding and wanting so much more out of life than they're prepared to put into it. I think if we could only have a little bit more of the cooperation that we had, because neighbours were supportive of each other. I mean, now you can talk to people and they'll say they've lived in a street or in a road for months and months and they don't know anybody. Years sometimes. And for years. And I think that we're missing an awful lot of the neighbourliness and the goodness that came out of that neighbourliness. Because if you had a problem, there was always somebody there to help you. A neighbour would help you. We didn't have to have community help. We didn't have to have somebody coming and asking all your business or what you're doing, how much you've got, whether you can do this or whether you can do that. There was just somebody there. And if you needed a shoulder to cry on, they were there. And they didn't ask you, they didn't want anything off you or anything in return for it. But now it seems to me that so much is, if I do something for you, what will you give me? And I think it's terribly something that we have brought to that stage. I think young people now are losing such an awful loss of, they talk about community spirit, but to me it's lacking in humanity. I can't describe it in any other way, but that's what it seems to me, that we've lost a tremendous lot of love and companionship between people because of the acquisition and wanting to possess more than what our neighbour has got. And really, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for listening to me. I hope I haven't bored you.
No.
Come again, Shimla, and I hope that I've given you a little tiny little bit of an insight in what life was like in Litherland when I was a child. And I should... Pardon? Where did we shop?
Oh,
Where did we shop?
yeah. In the early days,
In the early days.
doctors starved it.
Well, there used to be in Septon Street, there was a grocer's shop and a wine merchant called Saunders. And then there was, that was on the corner of that little row, Green Lane, was it? Yes. That was there. No, the nursery is built, there was a row of houses there. Yeah. Constitutional Club, there's a row of houses. And Lightfoot, the builders, yeah, they lived there a lot. Yeah. And then Saunders was next to those houses. Then there was the Middle Avenue. And then Matt Stubbs was on the corner. And Matt Stubbs had his slaughterhouse at the back of the thing. And he used to slaughter the animals. The animals used to come and he would kill them there. Hang them, you would see them hang there. And when they talk about all this business of, we've got this and we've got that and we've got the other, I think the Champagner didn't survive because you very often see Matt Stubbs in the doorway of his shop. He would have a carpus hung up on 2 hooks and he would chop down the middle of it and they would fall out apart. And I mean, I can remember standing and watching it, chopping down the...
Was anybody shot every day then?
Yes, everybody shot there, but mostly. Well, then there used to be. Does anybody remember there used to be a fish and chip shop in Sefton Street called Mrs. Bates, and I can remember when we used to go to the pictures. We used to go to Coliseum Picture House, my boyfriend and I, and we come back and we used to go in the fish and chip shop and buy. We used to buy fingers. Yes, we put. Well, I know 3 pence. 3 pence.
They're all red lights.
3 pence squares are the better of fingers. And we used to have chips dipped in batter. And we used to have fingers and we used to eat those walking up Field Lane because, of course, there was no butter. There was nothing. We had to walk up Field Lane.
And you get batter bits as well. Up and then back.
Yes. Oh, yes, you get batter bits. Yes, Kenilworth, the batter bits, yeah.
And Miss Hutchins shop there, when I was younger.
Yes,
But it wouldn't be the same there.
No, it wasn't. They changed hands. You said, the paper shop.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, I can remember when it used to be, when the papers, the original, before Mrs. Woods came, there was a paper shop that the people who had the paper shop on the corner of, by the corner of the road by the bridge, over the ridge. Arnold's. Their name was Arnold. Well, Mrs. Woods was Mr. Arnold's sister, and they came and took over the shop in Sefton Street, and the Arnolds moved to the one over the bridge, and that was a bit of family there, yeah.
You remember the Mill Randall Inn? Or was that before your time?
That was before my time. How do you remember that?
Was along Field Lane, wasn't it, Bitzel's?
Yes.
Lemonade shop.
They made the well, yeah.
Did you come all the way down so there's no shops?
No shops in Field Lane at all. There was one lady she used to have a little shop in her sitting room in the Sefton Street houses. Yes, and she got permission. I don't know quite well. I don't think she did. I don't think she asked the fish. I think she just sort of decided. I think she was a widow, and I think she decided that she sold things, and it eventually became like a little general store. It was just a sweet shop to start with, and then it became a little general store. She would have all sorts of things. She used to go. Her name was Clark, and used to go to Mrs. Clark's store odd bits of things. But then, of course, you see, there was Green's, the vegetable shop in Sefton Street. Now, then Donville's on the Canal Bridge. Now, Donville's used to send the boy up every morning. Before 10 o'clock, there would be a boy on a bicycle, and he would come and ask you what you wanted. And, you gave him a list, and he would bring that back again. He would cycle down to the shop and get it, and he had a basket on the front, and he would bring your food, your order back there for you by the time, almost by lunchtime, if you wanted something urgently by lunchtime. And that Stubbs had a boy who came up, and he would order, if you didn't want to go and see the meat that you were buying, you could depend on that Stubbs to be, sort of fair and square with you. And he would send the boy back again with chops, steak. They all do. Yes, most of the shops did. Most of the shops had what they called an order boy. Yes. Yeah. Yes, for delivering. I can remember too when Stubbs's farm used to have that they set the milk up. There used to be a truck that came up, and we always had a milk cow. And we used to go and get the milk. They would have the churn on the back of the milk thing, and we would get the milk out of it. The girl would push the milk out of the pint of milk out and into your jug or into your can, whichever you have. Yeah.
Hey. Oh.
Yes. 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 There was a lot of people, you see. We had a sort of simple, much more simple way of life, but everybody seemed to manage very well. I can never remember us going short of things. I mean, I go short of things now, but I never used to do. But I used to go short of Linfield Lane until the do now. Right? Right. Well, I'm sure I talked long enough.
Oh.